Hello everyone, this is World Federation Neurology social media team, YouTube channel and World Brain Day team. It is my honor and pleasure to have our guest today, Professor Stephen Kent, the Dean of Psychology and Public Health School at Trobe University, one of the premier universities in Australia and world. Steve, thank you very much for joining us despite the very busy schedule during crazy time. We are both in fifth lockdown, despite our liking. We are not going to talk about lockdown today. My first question is, Steve, tell us how Stephen Kent was baked, how Stephen Kent was made. Take us back to your high school days and take us through the journey from your school days to Dean of one of the premier public health schools and psychology schools in one of the premier universities in Australia and world.
Thank you very much, Tissa. How was Stephen Kent made? Well, when I was a teenager, we moved to so I grew up in the US, which many people would recognize the accent. But when I was a teenager, we moved from Detroit to a very small town in Indiana, so sort of out in the cornfields. One high school in the town, and so there were no streaming or anything of that nature. From there, I went and I did a lot of science type subjects and went into university thinking I was going to be a physicist or a physics major. And I went to a small liberal arts school called Wabash College and decided quickly that physics wasn't nearly as much fun as I thought it was. And I had taken psychology as an elective in my first year, which is easy to do in the American, certainly in a liberal arts system, and enjoyed it, and especially liked the bit on neuroscience. So the second semester, I took another elective that was specifically a neuroscience subject and really enjoyed it. And by that time, I decided I wasn't going to do physics whatsoever. And the American system does allow a bit of let's say floating, which I did in my second year. And in the course of that, I decided I really wanted to be a neuroscientist. That I found the brain and trying to understand the brain and how it relates to behavior just to be fascinating, and certainly a puzzle that was going to keep me busy for the rest of my life. And I met with the neuroscientist on campus in the staff, and essentially mapped out what I would need to do for the last 2 years of my undergraduate to position myself to be, I guess, competitive for one of the top graduate schools in the country. So I did all that. I went off and took biochemistry and organic chemistry and what have you, finished my psychology degree, and went to the University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana to work with Evelyn Satinoff. And at that point in time in my life, I was fascinated by sleep, and as I think most people are. And in the course of my PhD work, which was looking at how sleep, we're trying to understand the neuropharmacology of sleep, and how the experiments that were designed to do that weren't taking into account the other effects of a particular drug. So people were injecting drug X and saying, gee, rapid eye movement sleep goes up or rapid eye movement sleep goes down, without thinking the fact that drug X also causes the animal to vasodilate and body temperature drops. And so in fact, if you make an animal cold, if you make an animal warm, they don't sleep as well. So in fact, a lot of what was in the sleep literature at that time was actually just an artifact. But in the course of those studies, I got interested. This was in the late 1980s when the field of psychoneuroimmunology was really in its infancy and was still considered a little bit out there, let's say. But I got fascinated in the whole question of how does infection or immune activation alter sleep? And so I did one of the very first studies on that subject. And when I finished my PhD, I was tossing up what sort of postdoctoral fellowship to do, and had kind of assumed I would stay in the US and do one in a sleep focused lab. And there was a fellow named Robert Danzer, who's at that point in time was in Bordeaux, France. And Robert had spent a sabbatical in our lab and offered me a fellowship to come to Bordeaux to work on trying to understand the behavioral effects of cytokines. And this was, to me, this was a very exciting time to be in that area because interleukin-1 had just been isolated and identified, and it was just now available through recombinant technology. So it was just an opportunity to explore that interaction between the brain and the immune system. So I went to Bordeaux. I didn't speak a word of French, which was foolish in hindsight. And I was able to take my initial 12-month funding and get additional funding both from NATO and from the French government and extend it out to almost 4 years. And it was a fascinating time to be in that field because we were still trying to work out, if cytokines are released in the periphery, how do they end up affecting the brain? How do they cross the blood-brain barrier? No, as it turns out, no, they don't. They're very large and hydrophilic. And so, and we were a large team, which always gives you a lot of opportunities, and exploring that, both the question of the behavioral effects and how it is that immune activation and cytokine release ends up leading to decreases in appetite and motivation to eat, and all sorts of other behavioral changes, but also exploring the signaling pathway from the periphery to the brain. And early in my time there, we sort of focused on the role of the vagus nerve, and we're able to show that the vagus nerve is critically important for that communication, that if you cut the vagus nerve sort of below the diaphragm, and then still give compounds intraperitonially, they don't have an effect anymore. And other people were able to show that there were cytokine receptors on the periganglia near the vagus. And so what we were doing was, in collaboration, was mapping out this whole pathway of how cytokines get released peripherally, act on peripheral nerves, and then enter into the brain that way. And then the brain has its own immune system, if you will, and so it can produce cytokines, which then have flow-on effects within the brain itself. In the middle of, after that not quite 4-year period in Bordeaux, I went to Stanford and worked with a guy named Seymour, or Gig Levine, looking at how cytokines affect the HPA axis early in development. And because I was really keen on remaining in Bordeaux, I went back to Bordeaux for another year, trying to get a permanent position with INSERM, or the equivalent of the NIH in the French system. That obviously didn't work out, and I was on the job market. And I think because I was already out of the US and living in France, I was looking globally for a position. And this role appeared at La Trobe, and I knew of La Trobe because of people who were doing circadian rhythm studies, which was related to work I'd done in my PhD work, and I knew people who were from Melbourne. So I applied, and surprisingly to me at the time, I was offered the role, came to visit, decided I really liked Melbourne as a city, and moved here 26 years ago. And as they say, I haven't really looked back. So I came in as a lecturer, had success in getting funding through the Australian Research Council, a number of what they used to call them large grants, now the discovery projects and linkage grants. And in the course of that, continued my interest in psychoneuroimmunology, and so I guess complemented it with an interest in how food intake or caloric restriction would modify both behavior but also the immune response. And that was some of the more relatively recent work we've done. But in recent years, I've entered into the dark world of administration. And so for the last 11 years, I've been head of school and now dean of a much larger school. But still keep my finger in the research environment.
Fascinating. I mean, you were really smart to pick this area as the COVID-19 pandemic, and most of the stuff that we learned. I mean, cytokines, ACE2 receptor, they almost became household names. They were appearing in New Yorker, they were appearing in Age, they were appearing in Guardian, the ABC talking about them, BBC talking about them. All those psychoneuroimmunological topics became sort of a household names. And now you and me both know how critically important those two things are. That actually gave me a nice segue to the next topic. the behind me on the virtual screen, you see Stop Multiple Sclerosis World Brain Day 2021. This actually has some US link also. Take you through my memory lane, I think somewhere around 2007 or 2008. I was browsing through American Academy of Neurology website. I was a member by that time because I figured out as a junior member, for $150 you get almost like $10,000 for educational material coming from USA, free journals and all the podcasts and whatnot. Internet was not as speedy as now, but you get hard copies. Then I saw an advertisement from Academy asking for 3 overseas neurology trainees or neurologists. So they were specifically looking for people who wanted to change things, people who were thinking outside box. I didn't think myself as one of them, but as I was reading it, I realized that that was basically advertised for me. So I applied for it. This is known as Halatucci Advocacy Leadership Forum. So they basically put 30 of us, 27 US neurologists and neurology trainees, and 3 overseas. I happen to be one of them. And then they would put us through a big mill, basically training us how to talk to politicians, how to talk to media. And we were basically, I was sitting next to chief executive officer, president, all the big names, the neurology editor-in-chief, so on and so forth. So a bunch of us got to know each other at that time. By the time 2014 came, many of us were in various lead roles in global organizations. And we were having this sort of over a cup of coffee chat, just like you said, how we learn from each other by meeting. I remember as a casual chat, we were talking that we all understand the importance of brain health, brain disorders. We all know that neurological disorders are the leading cause of disability globally. Somehow, all of us work in tiny departments, whether we are in US or UK or Australia, and the brain doesn't seem to have a bigger role in our major hospital networks and universities also for that matter. So then we felt that maybe we should have a particular day dedicated to brain so that we can basically promote brain health. That was that. And as you can see, now we are on to the 8th year of World Brain Day. Now this has been sort of supported and endorsed by all global neurological organizations, including World Health Organization also. And this year I expect to cut to almost 150 million globally. It's unbelievable. It's phenomenal. And my question to you is, as a dedicated brain philiac or brain health advocate, as a senior academic and a die-hard researcher of brain health, how excited are you to see global organizations such as World Federation of Neurology, World Health Organization, Multiple Sclerosis International Federation, American Academy of Neurology, European Academy of Neurology, you name it, the whole lot, supporting a sort of global campaign to reach out to normal people promoting brain health. How excited are you to see that global bodies are thinking outside the box and going to the grassroots to talk about brain?
I think it's fantastic. I mean, it's kind of ironic that essentially, I mean, what you've described is that the brain needs to increase its profile, and yet if you ask the average person, they're fascinated by the brain. I mean, I don't know how many times I've gone to a dinner party and people say, "Oh, what do you do?" "I'm a neuroscientist," and then boom, the eyes flash open and they've got peppering me with questions. People are fascinated by the brain because it's so mysterious and yet so incredibly important in everything we do in everyday life. And as you've highlighted, when things go array within the brain, it's incredibly debilitating to the individual, to the family, and to society. I mean, I don't want to somehow create a hierarchy of organs, but I would put the brain at the top. I'm a little biased, of course, but to have it raise its profile like this, and I think in particular, we need the general public to understand the challenges that we face in trying to understand how the brain functions and the implications of that for health, not just for mental health, which is critically important, but for response to stroke and other insults to the brain that are incredibly debilitating. But the more that people are aware of I guess, the importance of the brain and the consequences of damage to the brain, then the more likely they are then to join us in lobbying governments to increase funding, or at least maintain funding, but increase funding so that we can actually get those new treatments, new discoveries that will allow us to overcome some of the challenges that face us right now from, I guess, when brains don't function optimally. And, and I can see that, this year it's about multiple sclerosis, which is incredibly important. I certainly know several people who suffer from multiple sclerosis, and it's a real mystery. There isn't any. It's not clear. I mean, it's not clear what the cause is. We understand some of the processes that are involved, and there are some treatments, but they're not that effective, and they're not without serious side effects. So you may not actually be aware of this, but about 15 years ago, I got invited to speak at an MS Society meeting here in Australia, specifically to talk about my research in psychoneuroimmunology. And what I was able to do was and that organization, with about half of the attendees are individuals with MS or their families or their carers, and the other bit there's a little bit of funders, but also basic researchers like us. And in talking about psychoneuroimmunology, you end up talking about stress and how stress then activates the immune system and how that can then aggravate the symptoms of MS. And then you can very cautiously get into alternatives to stress and how that can help to mediate some of the effects of stress. I mean, to me, psychoneuroimmunology, because it's looking at the body as a whole, with the brain at the focus of it. But I think the whole idea of a brain day, and then to focus on different conditions each year is a phenomenal idea.
I agree. I think you hit the nail on the head. It's a pity that we don't have time to talk. We could talk the whole day on this topic. You're absolutely right. I can go through a whole lot of anecdotes as a practicing clinician, that how my new diagnosed MS patients almost had a prodrome, while I was repeatedly telling them that you don't have MS at this point of time. You may have that sometime later, but at this point of time, I can reassure you that there's absolutely nothing to suggest that you got MS. But a couple of them indeed end up with MS as we were monitoring them. We were not monitoring them for MS. And you could see that how stress was playing a big role on their psychoneuroimmunological pathways. I could basically write 3 or 4 books on some of those patients that I know of very well. Almost like Oliver Sacks, if you like.
Yes.
But we are not allowed to do that in this era, unfortunately. So I think as you know, I am convinced that psychoneuroimmunology play a huge role in this area. In fact, during last couple of years, I've been involved in World Brain Day campaign since the inception, but I've been chairing it globally for the last couple of years. During last 2 or 3 years, one of my main aim is to put as much synergy as possible. For me, every medical student, every psychology student, every nursing student that is out there is enormously important for me, as I see them as an advocate for brain health. It's up to us how we convince them or how we brainwash them to get them on board. I think the world is not going to give us a big bag of money saying that the brain is important, here is the money to get the job done. I think what we need to do is to collect as much synergy as possible and then use the material that we have as cleverly as possible and as effectively as possible to maintain humanity and promote humanity. And the COVID-19 has basically asked us to put the sort of speed pedal. It's now or never, isn't it?
And the pandemic has certainly highlighted the importance of public health and our entire health system in a way that's just stark, because the differences you see between different countries and how they've managed or not managed as well, in many ways, in many instances, does come down to the efficiency of the healthcare system and the public health measures that have been implemented and whether or not they've been followed. But I like your idea of mobilizing an army of nurses and medical students to to get them to understand the importance of the brain. And certainly within the field of psychoneuroimmunology, we've faced that challenge with the medical community, because initially, the common medical response would be, oh, the immune system is not under any regulation. It's autonomous. And we now know that's a complete and utter fallacy. But it's taken years, if not decades, to get that sort of information into medical training. But it is slowly but surely creeping in there.
Absolutely, and the every time when I teach medical students, I remind them that although I'm a neurologist, what you learn today in biochemistry, physiology, anatomy, psychology, they are all interconnected. And
Yeah.
whatever the thing that you want to become eventually, whether you become a primary care physician, researcher, administrator, eventually the human behavior, brain behavior, how we adapt to different situations, basically matter a lot. I even personally feel that the health outcomes that we measure probably need to change. I know that this is somewhat inflammatory comment. At the moment, we go this black and white approach. We go through this physical parameters, disability measured in particular numbers and this and that. But you and me both know what matters is how satisfied we are.
Yep.
As how with the purpose of our life and purpose of what we are doing, irrespective of the disability. You could see that when you see Paralympics and other things, cannot basically deprive people from competing at highest level, even without all four limbs.
Yeah.
And it just show us. I mean, when you look at people like late Professor Stephen Hawking, you could see that the physical disability is almost negligible when it comes to proper use of psychoneuroimmunology and proper use of brain health. And the other important thing is when you look at the definition of health that World Health Organization itself put forward in 1948, if I remember correctly, as the health they defined as the complete physical, social, and psychological well-being, not mere absence of disease or infirmity. Although they didn't talk about psychoneuroimmunology or brain health, it is already there in that definition, isn't it? Without having brain health or without having proper functioning or preserved some sort of brain function, you cannot have complete psychological and social or even physical well-being for that matter.
Yeah. No, you've got to think of the individual in a holistic manner, and that's certainly psychoneuroimmunology does that. And so when I lecture on this topic, one of the early points I make to students is that these systems, the nervous system and the immune system are not separate. That they actually speak the same language. They communicate with the same biomolecules, and they speak the same language. They are in constant communication with one another. And in hindsight, it's kind of obvious. How could they not be in communication? And it helps to explain why our mood state ends up affecting our health, both positively and adversely.
And when you watch natural things, including plants and animals, you could observe that how smart animals do this. Say, for an example, while we were probably harming a large number of stroke patients by offering them blanket physical therapy approach, sometimes back when we didn't know that hyperacute physical therapy is harmful, all you have to do is an injured rabbit or injured dog or injured cat. You don't need a vet to tell them to not to move. They know exactly when to move and when not to move.
And that's actually, again, one of the key points I make when I'm giving these sorts of lectures to undergraduate students is that, we tend to think of the symptoms of infection, a fever, not feeling social, etc., as being symptoms that are due to debilitation. And in fact, they're not. They're part of an organized, highly conserved evolutionary approach and response to infection that actually enables the individual to overcome or certainly potentiates the ability of the individual to overcome the infection. I mean, fever, up to a point, is actually very advantageous for the immune system and very disadvantageous for whatever pathogens infected you. And from a looking at a societal point of view, and not including animal organizations, if you're infected, you shouldn't be moving around. You should go curl up in your bed or in your burrow so that you don't infect everyone else. And you should be going out looking for food when you're in a weakened state. So you've got plenty of reserves. So they're all very conserved, and you find them not just in mammals, but in fact, even in invertebrates in some cases.
The fascinating thing is, Steve, our ancestors knew this very well. I remember before I knew anything about science, when I was growing up in very rural Sri Lanka, when we expose ourselves to some of the infections, pre-vaccination era, measles, mumps, chickenpox, things like that, in our village setting, they were regarded as God's illnesses. In other words, so if a particular kid or someone got infected, they would put some the branches of tree leaves, if you like, on the sort of entrance to the property, and then the word go around the village that oh, that family is having someone with God's illness. So for the next 2 weeks, we should not be intermingling with them. The food that we were supposed to be eating would be reasonably healthy but limited, and we would be restricted. We would basically be in isolation or self-quarantine.
Yeah.
And so despite they did not know about our value or this or that, they protected the whole village. Despite they didn't know incubation period, they probably figured out that when they are having infection, it is important for them to give the best chance of recovery by giving them reasonable amount of controlled food supply and hide them from others so that they don't spread that. It's unbelievable, isn't it?
Yeah.
My last question, Steve. What are your messages to the youngsters during this really difficult time that you and me both in, wherever they are?
Well, a couple of things come right to mind. Obviously, I mean, the sort of almost cliche one is to follow your passion, and don't worry about where it's going to lead you, because something good will come from that. And you can't manufacture passion; it has to come from inside. And it's okay if you don't know where you're going. As long as you've got that passion that's driving you towards some sort of, I wouldn't say end goal, but some sort of pathway. You earlier mentioned how you were, as a very young neurologist, got invited to this organization where you met and you networked, and that would be something I would certainly encourage everyone to do, but certainly younger scientists to do. Take advantage of opportunities and invitations to network, because you never know what will come from it. You never know who you'll meet, you never know what you'll learn, and you never know where you and these other individuals are going to end up with or end up at. And as you described yourself, Tissa, I mean, many of you ended up in very senior roles, in which case you've got that network to draw upon to really make change happen. And change doesn't happen by an individual. Change happens through networks and through organizations. And networking has a bit of a negative connotation, but to me, networking is just being social. And it's not being social to be social, being social to learn things. It's not about doing it with some sort of opportunistic goal in mind, because people see through that. But just learn from one another. And I mean, in regards to the current difficult times we're undergoing, be kind to yourself, network, use technology as much as you can, reach out to people, support one another, be kind to one another, and just and as much as one can, remain very positive, because we will get through this. Science will get us out of this. It just was going to take a little bit more time.
Absolutely. I echo all what you said. Be passionate on what you do. Don't worry about where it would take. It would definitely lead to good things. You're absolutely right. When we got to know each other, none of us were thinking or planning to be this person or do this. When we were proposing that we should have a brain day, I never dreamt that I would be chairing this group. It was never in my mind at all. In fact, I remember vividly when we were writing the initial contents, as I was the most junior member in 2014, everyone else was senior professors. I think I had only one publication in front of me, and I used to tell my wife and other family members that I would have been the only person who read that because it was such a boring the segment that I wrote on insects, the pesticide poisoning and neurological toxic effects and this and that. I remember vividly when other senior professors wrote the contents of First World Brain Day, we were talking about brain health, wanting the world to look at it. At Western Health, I did not have even office space at that time. I didn't have a PC. I was basically signing off, although I was a stroke head, as there was nobody to run stroke unit at that time. I was basically signing off document on top of a dustbin. This is in Melbourne, not long ago, some around sort of 2008, 2009. And but I wasn't complaining. I was happy like anything because I could see that we were doing big changes to human life. And I remember vividly, as I didn't like the senior professors wrote, as it was too medical jargon and way out of what normal people believe. I had the advantage of being a young journalist back in Sri Lanka, so I wrote a lot to lay people, so I knew exactly how to write to normal people. So in the end, I sort of got courage and I changed every single word that others have written. And I remember vividly, I wrote very simple things. Brain is a sophisticated biological computer. It has well over 100 billion biological electrical wires clumped together, very much similar to traveling around planet Earth 4 times in a row. And they talk to each other through chemical connections, which are known as synapses. Unfortunately, at this point of time, the very organ that makes us who we are is at crossroad because things like stroke, dementia are threatening its existence. And it is important for us to learn how to preserve its, so something along that line. And after thinking overnight, I sort of clicked the send button next day morning, thinking that I would get a barrage of criticism from all the senior professors globally, to the rest of the other committee members. But to my surprise, they all endorsed what I wrote, and that's what went out globally. And you're absolutely right. I think the networking is critically important, and you never know where you end up eventually.
Nope, you just certainly don't. And what you were just saying there, I think is critical. I mean, for everyone in the field, is that if we want to reach the rest of the world, we can't sort of hide behind our jargon. I mean, we have to use language that people can understand. And if we do that, then we can bring them along with us. But if we stick with jargon, then we create a barrier, and that's just not going to be helpful.
Absolutely, I think that's a good the point to conclude this discussion. Also, I mean, we are in the middle of this pandemic. We are both frustrated in Australia itself with the slowness of vaccination rollout, but there's no other way. We just have to get people on board by educating them one at a time.
Yep, one at a time. That's it.
You can understand.
Exactly. No, and it is one at a time, but one can then, if you get one, then that one can get one more, and then, it becomes a tidal wave. It just takes a lot of effort, but it will happen.
Absolutely. We can be like the Delta variant of the virus, one at a time, keep infecting others with good ideas.
I like that. Yeah.
It's a pleasure, Steve, to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining us. All the very best during these difficult times, and stay well and stay safe. And good luck with all the tough administrative decisions that you probably have to take in time to come.
Thank you very much, Tisha. It's been a pleasure. Okay, and good luck with World Brain Day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.